Hello and welcome to episode 22 of the Wimlex Show. Today I, Willem, will be talking with Lena Hackeloer about e-commerce and fintech. Lena is a German living in Stockholm and she will be talking about fintech and the trends in the market. Beside that, she will also touch upon Sweden as a very successful hub for entrepreneurs and scale-ups, and she will talk about the differences between the Nordics and continental Europe. So sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 22 of the Wimlex podcast. Hello everybody, welcome to episode 22 of the Wimlex podcast. We're delighted that we're joined today by Lena Hackeloer, who's the founder of Brite, a fintech startup company, and who was previously at the unicorn Klarna and also at Qliro, another fintech company. Great to have you here because you're also going to be our co-host for podcasts in the Nordics. Welcome, Lena.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Could you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Absolutely. My name is Lena Hackeloer. I'm from Germany originally, but have been living in Sweden for the past, soon 10 years. Have been working in fintech, primarily towards e-commerce businesses all along. And yes, very happy to be here today and record this podcast with you. It's a first for me.
Great to have you. And then we need to figure out a new name of our show for future podcasts because Wimlex includes part of our name. So Lena, maybe we can add Le Wimlex show. Also target a French audience. So a little bit more about you. What's your history? What's your background? How did you end up in fintech?
That was actually a complete coincidence. So I've been moving all over Europe a little bit when I was younger and eventually ended up in France, and then got contacted by a company called Klarna, who are, I believe, much more known today than they were at the time. This is back in 2010. So it was a fairly small fintech business, located in Stockholm, co-founded by 3 founders. And they were just about to internationalize outside of the Nordics. So they got in touch, came in contact with me through recommendation, and I interviewed and took a marketing position initially. And then we started really building on the German market and trying to grow the business more internationally. Initially, I didn't think I was going to stay in Stockholm all that long or in Sweden, but I ended up staying for 7 years. It was a fantastic ride. So that's really my background.
Great. And so maybe for the listeners who are not that into fintech, my understanding of Klarna is it's a post-payment service. Is that also how they started?
That's right. Yes, absolutely. So they focus on a niche that's called after delivery payment, or that's how I like to view it anyways. So there's a component of real-time credit scoring where basically they can predict as a consumer when you make your purchase whether you will be able to pay your invoice or not, or you will be able to pay your installment purchase or not, which is a very interesting model from a payments point of view because there's obviously monetization on the merchant and there's also monetization on the consumer. And it's a very consumer fronting service compared to other payment services that are much more niched into the merchant direction.
And how have they been able to expand so rapidly? Have they been funded by the well-known VCs, or
yes, they have.
Is there another reason for their expansion drift?
No, they're very well funded. They have Sequoia, one of the big international ones from the States, and they also have General Atlantic, for example, Atomico. There's a couple of really big names behind them, but it's really they were quite profitable from the start. So already when I joined, we were about 150 people then, I think. They were already profitable. Wow! So they've been funding their own growth. Yeah, it's quite a success story, I would say, from Klarna's point of view.
And then if you look at the business model of Klarna, it's after delivery payments, as you call it. I can imagine that there's a higher credit risk compared to prepayments. How does Klarna deal with that?
They have quite an impressive model for credit scoring, which I think is much of the sort of unique capacity that particular business has. It also presented some of the growing pains in the beginning when I joined the business and we came into the DACH region where the infrastructure was a totally different one compared to Sweden. But that's really what they have done well. So yes, absolutely. Credit risk is part of it, and it's part of their offering that they take that away from a merchant point of view. So they will guarantee the payout towards the retailers and they take the risk. So that's built into the model.
Cool. And you said the DACH region. They expanded in the DACH region also thanks to an acquisition, I think.
Yes, partly.
Of a company called So Forth.
That's right.
And so for the non-German listeners, is an incredible success story in the German market. Could you elaborate a little bit more on what Sofort did and what Klarna took over and why they've become so successful?
Mm-hmm. No, it's quite an interesting completion, I would say, of the Klarna offering. So Klarna entered the German market in 2010, which was exactly when I joined at the same time. That's why I remember so well. And we bought Sofort, I believe, in 2014. The merger came to a close. So it was already well into the story of the German market at the time. But Sofort in itself, I think, is a very interesting case. Of course, myself, I wasn't part of founding that business, so I only came in touch with them as part of the process with Klarna when we did the merger. But they are also a fintech, a challenger that offers direct bank-to-bank payments. So what they really do is they cause a payment on behalf of the end consumer through the online banking interface, which is obviously a direct payment right then and there. That yields itself very well, I think, to anything that's consumed straight away. So that's fantastic for travel, digital goods, also for e-commerce, but really quite widely used across a number of different categories. And what Klarna does in after delivery payments, it can also be, of course, used universally, but I think, for example, works particularly well when it comes to fashion. It's one of the strong segments that they have. Basically because, of course, typically you order several items. You don't want to pay for all of them. So you'll order them, keep a few, send the rest back, and then only pay for the ones that you actually keep. And that's something that works very nicely with after delivery payments. So from that point of view, I think from product offering, it was a very nice completion. And then obviously in 2014, Sofort had already come quite a long way. So they were very well established on the German market. They were a huge brand. I think the brand awareness was somewhere up in the region of 70-80%.
And how did they do that? Because I can imagine that there was an abundance of small players trying to get to the market and become like in a leading position. Why has Sofort succeeded?
I think they had a very persistent management team, to be honest. I was so impressed. It's not a secret, they have not been loved by the banks in the beginning. I don't think the banks necessarily loved losing the touch point with the consumer because really when you use Sofort, you use their interface. You don't really see your own online bank. So there was quite a lot of friction towards the banks in the beginning, has been covered quite widely through the media. And I think the management team has sort of stuck by it and hasn't lost their faith. Also, it's a particular category of payment that can be used at a quite good cost from a merchant point of view. So typically in the German market, in the payment mix, it's one of the lower cost payments.
Okay.
So there's an incentive also for the retailer to offer it or to push it towards their end consumers. So I think there's a number of different factors that rendered it successful, but they were definitely very persistent, and there was I think a constant threat in the discussions that they were having towards the banks.
And I think what I can recall is that, and what you also told me before this podcast, that the German banks try to start a competing system as well.
There is, yes, absolutely. There's a business called, well, at least in the very same category, called PayDirect, that is actually owned by a conglomerate of the German banks. And they have been around for a few years as well. I think they were founded, if I'm not totally mistaken, in 2014, I think. So that's been
the year that you bought Sofort.
The year that we bought Sofort. Precisely.
Bought Sofort.
Not me personally, but us at the time, yes.
And why didn't they succeed? Or is there still market share that is being acquired by them?
They are. I believe that they are growing, from what I understand.
Yeah.
But it's not as widely used by comparison, I think, as Sofort is.
Okay.
Sofort has in the meantime been rebranded to Klarna.
Yeah.
So it's part of the Klarna offering now. So the Sofort brand as such has ceased to exist on the German market, but the offering, of course, is still there.
Okay.
It's also integrated in Klarna's checkout solution. Yeah. So they've really leveraged it.
And if you then look at the markets, I think what you displayed on your profile is that you were responsible for the German market, but also the Benelux. How did you see the Dutch fintech market, and especially on e-commerce payments? Because in the Netherlands, everybody uses Ideal. Mm-hmm. It's like the platform, the go-to platform, also with relatively low tariffs for merchants. Mm-hmm. Did you crack into the Dutch market? And if yes, how did you get to a position?
To be totally fair, I think the Dutch market is challenging because of the strong dominance of Ideal. Absolutely. It's just so widely established already. And I was responsible for the marketing piece, not for the market overall.
Yeah.
So I was wearing the marketing hat. So that was difficult. But Klarna has also had a presence. So they have been, of course, growing in the after delivery segment because that doesn't compete as strongly with Ideal because it's a separate offering. But I think Sofort and Ideal are more heads-on-heads competitors. So that would have been more difficult, definitely.
So we touched upon a couple of players in the payment field. Mm-hmm. Since you've been in the market since 2010, almost 9 years, you've worked internationally as well in the countries where most of our listeners are from. What for you are like the main trends that you've seen over the years, and how would you compare, say, the Nordics to the DACH region, the Benelux, and maybe continental Europe as a whole?
Interesting question, because it is really quite different. Starting perhaps with the latter part of your question. In Sweden, for example, which is really the market, that's where I live, that's our home market. Sweden is an incredibly digital society, so people are typically rather fast to adopt new trends, and things are moving rather quickly. So, for example, in Klarna, partly due because we're a Swedish company, of course, would always pioneer a solution in Sweden first before we took it to Germany, at least during the time when I was there. And that's really something that makes it, of course, a lot easier sort of gaining traction with consumers. That's my experience, at least. Funnily enough, going back to the example of what you were saying, PayDirect is a local competitor to Sport in Germany. There's also a company in Sweden called Swish, which is in the exact same segment. They also do direct payments, slightly different infrastructure behind it. But that is, for example, a massive success story, perhaps the biggest success story that I've seen over the last couple of years in the Nordic region.
And what does Swish do? Is it a P2P platform, or
can
you also use it as a merchant?
Yes, no, absolutely. It's an app.
Yeah.
And it hinges very heavily upon Bank ID,
okay,
which is a verification service in Sweden that is extremely widely used. I think most adults in Sweden probably use Bank ID.
Okay, so everybody has a Bank ID.
Precisely. Yeah, well, okay, so it starts with the fact that everybody has a personal number in Sweden. So all Swedish citizens are numbered. So that's something that you use very much in your day-to-day life. Yeah. And with that personal number, you can sign yourself up for Bank ID, which is issued by the different banks as an identification service. Okay. And you can use that Bank ID essentially as a digital signature to complete contracts online, but you would also use it to log into your online banking, to complete a payment, really quite widely across the digital landscape. Okay, cool. And Swish hinges upon using this identification method to cause payments in real time. And initially it was peer-to-peer, and it's always been free, but they've been rolling it out also towards merchants. So now it's being used, for example, in e-commerce, but also you can use it offline in your local shop if they accept Swish. And just the way that's been adopted, it's been quite massive. I think they have 6.5 million users was the last statistics I saw. In a market that has 9 million citizens.
Wow.
The penetration
and how many adults live in Sweden? It's probably like 7 or... Yes. So you could say that they penetrated the market almost 100% for the adults.
Yes, and they're equally as old, I think, as PayDirect, give and take 1 year.
Okay.
So given that comparison, it's quite interesting, I think, when it comes to the adoption. Then they're also owned by a conglomerate
of
banks.
How do the banks react to the success of Swish?
They are bank-owned, actually.
They're bank-owned?
Yes. As
by
is Bank
all
ID.
Banks or
yes,
one of them?
I think it was 6 large ones initially.
Okay.
But it's very much backed by the banks.
Okay.
And that's interesting because it's really quite a different landscape. So that's what you can see generally in the Nordics, that the cooperation among the different banks and the willingness to push forward in the digital space is very different compared, for example, to, say, Germany. Which is a much more fragmented bank market with different interests. Yeah,
because I know here in the Netherlands we have a similar system called Tikkie. Mm-hmm. Tikkie is also a P2P payments platform, integrated with WhatsApp. So you can just send if you have a telephone number, so the identification is telephone number. Mm-hmm. If you have a telephone number, you just send somebody a Tikkie link, and then they can proceed to the app to make the payment and to their banking app. The good thing is that P2P payment platform is also bank independent, so you can use it with any bank. Mm-hmm. What I've seen fail in the past is that when these P2P apps started, usually they were bank owned, but also controlled to only send money back and forth between people who had an account at that bank. Mm-hmm. Is that something that happened in Germany? Do you see these systems arise in Germany and fail because of the lack of interconnectedness between the bank accounts?
There's smaller players coming up, but nothing as widely adapted to the same extent. Nothing that I've seen that's being used all across. That's really such a large phenomenon that a large share of the adult population would use it.
Wow.
So that's something that I think is perhaps easier in markets that are more centralized, such as the Netherlands as well.
And going back to your Swedish example, saying like at Klarna we had a culture of innovation and adopting new technologies. I think that's typical for Klarna, but also for many other successful Swedish or Stockholm-based unicorns. Is there something in the water in Stockholm that people want to become an entrepreneur and have these huge ambitions? Because if you look at the density of the unicorns in Europe, Stockholm per capita of inhabitants is the highest in Europe.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe in terms of total size, London has more. But if you compare the size of the city to the amount of tech companies and unicorn tech companies, I think, Stockholm is really an example for the rest of Europe. So again, is there something in the water in Stockholm?
I'm not sure it has to do with the water, but you're right. People tend to say that Stockholm is sort of the capital of, especially I think fintech, music tech, I think as well. What I can say, at least having lived there now for almost 10 years, is that there is more of a culture of entrepreneurship, definitely. I would say I did a benchmark recently in my circle of friends in Sweden, and I think half of them, one way or another, have their own business, either on the side or they're involved in something, or they even do it full time. And I can say in Germany, which is my home country, the ratio is definitely much lower. So there is more of a culture of entrepreneurship. I think that the stigma that comes with failure isn't as strong.
Okay.
It doesn't feel like it's such a big deal in Stockholm if you founded a company and it didn't really turn out what you wanted it to be, as it may be in Germany. So that's, I think, a general mindset. And then the Swedish society generally is just so much more digital. Sometimes when I go back to Germany, I can be surprised as to how non-digital the society really is by comparison. And then I don't only mean access to mobile phones, access to internet, which is amazing in Sweden by comparison, definitely. But also just the way that tech is built into your day-to-day life. So in Germany, I know there's been a discussion the past couple of months about having this digital health file, where basically you would have your health record at hand, and several doctors will be able to access the same file, which isn't the case in Germany today. If you get a prescription, that will still be paper-based. In Sweden, ever since I moved there, everything's been digital. You can go to any pharmacy in the country with your personal number, and they'll be able to pull up your record and issue a subscription that a doctor has made for you a few months ago somewhere else in the country. And that's just one example. If you go to Stockholm and you're trying to use a bus, you can't pay cash anymore. You'll have to complete a purchase through an app to even use the bus, which of course in Germany is totally unheard of. There's many restaurants and bars who don't accept cash at all anymore, as all digital payments. So generally I think the affinity to digitalization is much higher in Sweden, and compared with a sense that entrepreneurship is cool and is desirable, I think that helps a lot push things forward.
And do you then, because you had these success cases of Klarna, of Spotify, and many others, how are these entrepreneurs, these founders of the multi-billion euro companies behaving? Are they also seen as role models? Are they also involved in mentorships and coaching programs? So how do these people help build the ecosystem?
Absolutely. I believe so. Stockholm is a large city, perhaps by number of inhabitants, but really it's, we tend to joke that it's really quite small when you live there. So people typically have strong networks amongst each other. And I can only speak about one founder, the one that I've worked with, which is Sebastian, the founder of Klarna. And I think he is definitely a strong role model. He hails from Stockholm School of Economics, which is one of the, I think, most prestigious business schools in Sweden. And he's been involved in their incubator program, which is also where Klarna was initially founded. So I think he has a strong sense of wanting to give back. So yes, I think that he is definitely, along with the other two co-founders that the business has, he's quite celebrated. The same goes, I believe, for Daniel, who's the founder of Spotify.
Daniel Ek.
Yes, precisely. Not someone I've worked with personally, but you can see him quite widely covered. So yes, definitely, they're celebrated, I would say.
So I hear what you're saying, like the culture, the the innovative spirit of the Swedes, role models. There's one component that is maybe more difficult to cover also in Germany and the Netherlands, which is the involvement of the government. And of course, we're talking about like the electronic patient files here in the Netherlands as well. And it's a wish for years to have like one integrated app or service where your whole medical file is compiled in. The Swedes pulled it off. And usually you see government as somebody who lags behind and who's slow on adopting these new technologies. Why do you think the Swedish government is embracing this, but also is able to implement this? Because I think if we compare it here to the Netherlands, of course the government is embracing digital trends as well. But there are many failures of tech projects by the government in the Netherlands. How come the Swedish government has been successful in this?
That's a good question. There's probably a very smart answer to it, but I have a personal theory, and that is, I think generally speaking, the Scandinavian markets, and I think the same goes for Norway, for example, as well, or even for Denmark, they're not huge markets by definition. They don't have huge industrial conglomerates, maybe to what you're used to from larger economies in continental Europe. So I think they're a bit more forced to inspire entrepreneurship and especially digital ventures, because they feel that that's a space where they can actually make a big contribution. That's at least how I have felt, because there is a lot of push from the government. There's loans, for example, to founders on quite a large scale. There's quite famously, I think, two small founders in Stockholm. There's a player called Almi who give out loans to founders at very favorable rates. And the threshold is not incredibly high to get them, which actually there's a number of businesses that I'm in my circle of friends who have taken those loans to begin with and who've then built successful businesses on top of that. So I think there's, generally speaking, definitely a will to grow and to fuel the economy from that angle, perhaps partly because they're forced to, more than what you would see, for example, on the German market. That's my theory.
Cool. Yeah, nice. So talking about you personally, you started at Klarna. It's a unicorn company, a multi-billion euro company. Then you moved on to Qliro, which is a Stockholm-listed fintech company. Yes. And you were CEO at Qliro. Stock listed. I think you mentioned it before we started this podcast. A couple of hundred people work there. And then you moved to found your own startup, which is Brite. And that's completely different ball game. You're now an entrepreneur. You have your feet in the mud again, and you need to figure out everything yourself. If you look at that career path, going from like a big company to mid-sized company to like a startup, A, how does that feel for you? And B, why did you make the decision to leave Qliro and start your own business?
No, it's very much, to me, actually back to the roots. Because when I joined Klarna in the beginning, as much as it is a big success story in the unicorn that it is today, it wasn't when I joined. Absolutely not. We were struggling when we first came to the German market. No one knew who we even were. And this is, 2010, it wasn't, that category of payment wasn't established at all. So I felt it was very entrepreneurial at the time. Then we grew the business. Today they actually have 2,500 people working there. So it's much, much larger than we, I think, ever anticipated, at least than I did. Perhaps the founder had such a vision. So then moving on to Qliro, which is actually listed as part of Qliro Group, to be transparent. So that's an e-commerce group. So it was founded initially as a in-house payment provider, I would say. That was then was offered externally as well. So there is a red thread.
They focus on pre or post payments or both?
Pay after delivery, just like Klarna does as well.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
They offer all kinds of payments now for e-commerce.
Yeah.
So similar to Klarna too.
Yeah.
But that was also sort of then a small intrapreneurial story, perhaps. So there's a red thread. But yes, definitely, of course, a much more corporate setting. So now with Brite, I feel like I go back to the beginning of my career. It's just that I go all the way. So I'm a co-founder to the business rather than just an employee. But there is a component of going back to the roots, I think. And it feels great. That's what I love best. I love to build. I like the struggle of getting things off the ground. And very much the firefighting mode on a sort of day-to-day business as you're setting up the team. You don't have the employees there yet, but you've hired great people that are coming in. But in the meantime, you have to cover. So all of those struggles, that's really what I like best. So that's right.
When did you found Brite?
Not that long ago. We did this in March.
In March this year.
So it's just been a few months, really.
Fourth month.
Mm-hmm.
And with how many people are you now?
We're now 20.
20, that's amazing. So in 4 months, going from 0 to 20 people. How's the Swedish labor market? Is it easy to hire talents? Or
I can tell you, especially on the engineering side and the developers, it's extremely tricky.
Okay.
Absolutely. And that's the downside of Stockholm being such a hub for tech. Everyone's struggling to find great people on that end. We've been lucky. I think we've found some pretty great guys. Yeah. But then, of course, our need is nowhere near the one of, for example, Klarna and Spotify. Okay. Some of the larger, I believe, tech employers in town. But it's tricky for sure. But we also benefit. Yeah, it's fairly expensive, I would say. Definitely.
So did you raise capital then, or how were you funded? Yeah.
We're funded by a couple of different, primarily tech entrepreneurs, I would say, from the Stockholm ecosystem and by a company called A Group of Friends. Okay. So they're investors that are in turn also funded by entrepreneurs. So it's a very entrepreneurial setting overall. There's a bunch of great people in the network that I can bounce with that have been part of other success stories as well. So we're lucky in that way, I think.
Nice. And I think you're still figuring out like figuring out is a big word, but you're still developing your service portfolio of Brite. Mm-hmm. Could you maybe give us a sneak preview on which part of the fintech world you're going to be active in?
No, absolutely. So to put it on the map, we're focusing on direct payments. So anything, again, similar to what Sofort did, actually, anything that's consumed straight away. That's what we focus on. So we only have a merchant offering. We don't focus on the consumer. Where, for example, Klarna, the past couple of years, has been focusing a lot more on the consumer. They have developed famously a very strong brand with their Snoop Dogg campaigns, and that's been their route. But what we do is we really focus more on a B2B2C model. So direct payments that can be integrated anywhere in any vertical. So you could use us in e-commerce, you could use us in travel, anywhere you like, but we make payments right then and there at the consumer uses the service. So there's no credit component, for example.
Okay, cool. Mm-hmm. And when are you? When will your go-to-market date be? Or
right after this summer. Yes.
Okay, nice.
That's our goal. Yes.
Cool. Mm-hmm. And international ambitions as well?
We do have international ambitions, but we're going to be following our customers quite a bit. Generally speaking, as is the case for all of us that are in the payment space, when we're licensed, we can passport our license across the EU. So technically, we have inroads to most European markets. So the growth path will depend very much, I think, on our customers and where they want us to be. Nice. That is a fairly scalable model. So yes, we're still very much in build-up phase, but very exciting.
Cool. Mm-hmm. So in terms of looking at the future, what are the big trends that you see? What will be the next Swiss or Tiki or so forth? If you can make a prediction.
That's hard to say because I think the payment space is becoming more and more crowded. Yeah. What I've been seeing is, and we consider ourselves that as well, is there's a lot of sort of second generation challenges that are coming into the market now, which is interesting in itself because I think it's a testimony to how innovation really works. But back in the day when we started Klarna, there was so much talk about how Klarna was challenging the banks. And I think the same was said for Sofort. But Qliro, for example, is a competitor to Klarna. So they have a very similar offering. So they're challenging the challengers, so to say.
The disruptor of the disruptors.
So to say, yeah. So, and it's similar for us at Brite. We're also disrupting a category that's already established. And then there's, of course, other players around that. There's a company founded in Stockholm by a couple of my former colleagues called Anyfin. And they focus, for example, on offering better terms for part payments that are partly, of course, given out by the likes of Klarna and Qliro. So they will help you get a better deal on your part payments, assuming that you have a running account with some of those fintechs. So they're also challenging the challengers, but from a different angle, going direct to consumer rather than going direct to merchant. So that's, I think, the stage that we're in now, because payments is becoming mature. It's becoming a crowded place, and it's very much a business of scale. At Klarna, we used to say that payments is very much a winner-takes-it-all type of market, because really when you can grab large volumes, that's when it becomes a really scalable business model. So therefore, I think that's really where the future lies, is sort of the iteration of the existing players and the challenging thereof, and then making a better offering, which is, I think, for the most part, in favor of both the merchant and the consumer.
And talking about better offering, I mean, of course, my background is digital marketing. So for me, the CRO part of a payment provider is important. To see in the checkout if there is any hindrance in converting people to an actual payment and an actual transaction. And actually here in the Netherlands, we have a success story, which is Adyen. Oh, yeah. So with Adyen, sometimes we discuss like how their payment solutions are benefiting the conversion rates of web shops. So that's one angle that I see as a payment provider that you can venture into. On the other hand, you've got loads of data, and with that data you can also, and maybe also with PSD2, there's an opportunity to leverage that data more and more. So that's another angle that could be explored. And then the third one obviously is if the market evolves, it's internationalization. So many more probably as well. What do you see as like the future if you look at these developments?
I think one of the things that will be decisive is that so far payments has been a very local market. And as any large retailer that sells all across will tell you, it's actually difficult to manage because there's so many different local players in payments. And I think that will go away. Okay. I think because of the advantages of the Lion scale, I think there will be more and more players that will cater to more markets. And I think that will become more uniform. I know there's ambitions, for example, of the bigger established payment schemes in Sweden to cover all of the Nordics or even go outside of the Nordics. Adyen, I think, is an amazing success story in Europe, if not the biggest one at this stage, actually.
Might be,
from a payments point of view.
20 billion valuation.
Yeah, incredible.
Slightly less, but yeah, there.
And I think also just, from a service offering, I think considered very much the best in class from what I hear in the market. So I think that also gives testimony of the fact that there is more and more or a more homogeneous offering across Europe. Then I think that the borders away from Europe will disappear more and more. Many of the larger players, of course, eyeing other continents, new geographies. I think the past couple of years in Europe, we've been more busy trying to nail the European markets, in all honesty, at least the companies that I've been working in. But these days, a lot of people are looking across the Atlantic. Exactly. They're looking at the States.
That's what Adyen also did. I think they got Facebook in, Uber, some other big tech company. I think Spotify as well. Might be. Not sure, but yeah. So that's also, but it's, I mean, these guys, the name Adyen, it's a Surinamese word standing for do it again. Or
really?
Second time.
I had no idea.
Yeah, so they founded Bibit first. They sold it to, I think, Bank of Scotland or Bank of Canada, one of the two. And then the founders started a payment provider again, but learning from the first one. And I think one of their early things they did well was to look at the States and to really go for the big social media platforms and online to offline apps. So I think you're right. If companies follow the example of Adyen, it's smart to also look across the Atlantic to the States, because if you can nail that market, then obviously Uber, Facebook have a global reach, and if you can benefit from that, like Adyen has done, immediately you're from a European player becoming a global player.
No, I mean, if you can follow your customers, it's perfect, because then you basically have some guaranteed volume in the beginning. I'm not saying that is the particular case now with these, the one that you've mentioned, but generally speaking, I think typically as you grow at least as a payment provider for businesses, you tend to sign up larger customers over time, and they tend to be more international. So it becomes quite natural, I think. And then what you mentioned earlier, PSD2, for example, is a good example for a regulation that also opens up and lowers the threshold. If you, for example, look at Sofort, in the early years, it wasn't at all clear that they would be able to access consumer bank accounts on behalf of the consumer still, which is now with PSD2, that's sort of part and parcel of that whole legislation, is that you have to give third-party providers access. So there's a lot of legislation, I think, that also eases that and makes it easier to become more international faster, hopefully.
Do you see now smart guys and girls venturing into fintech with that in the back of the mind, to build apps catered to consumers to access data and then find trends in, say, the way you spend your money on a weekly basis, or where you can save in expenses? Is that do you see that trend happening now?
Yes, absolutely. On that particular example, that topic, there's a company called Tink in Sweden who really provide access to lots of other businesses in that way, and help you, for example, categorize your data towards your consumers. They do it for some of the banks in Sweden as well. So you can log into your online banking, you can see where you've been spending, for example. So definitely, I think there's going to be lots more companies in that space coming up.
I mean, of course, PSD2 was a big thing, but still there are now like massive success stories on leveraging that data, or not to my knowledge, or maybe Tink is an example in the Nordics that's well known. Do you already see this success story like being covered in the news or like in the industry? Is that like happening right now?
Yeah, absolutely. As an example, they are, I think, very well covered.
Okay.
Definitely. So but it's a local phenomenon. Going back to the point that I'm making earlier.
Swedes are really like riding waves before continental Europe.
In that space, at least. So no, absolutely. I mean, they're perhaps less known, I think, in Germany or the other larger continental European markets. But in Sweden, that's a huge success story. Absolutely.
And the name is Tink?
Tink.
Tink.
Tink. With a K in the end.
K,
yeah.
Tink.
It's founded by 2 Swedish guys based in Stockholm.
Nice.
Quite heavily funded, I think. Also, if I'm not totally mistaken, I really don't want to say anything wrong now, but I think they're backed by one of the Dutch banks as well.
Okay, cool.
Not entirely. Well, bank backed in any way. I think that's safe to say.
Nice. So, going forward, I mean, you offered to be one of our co-hosts as well. Mm-hmm. Actually, Alexander, you don't know yet, but we just renamed the show into Le Wim Black Show. So what will you bring to the table? Who are you going to focus on, and what are your angles in future podcasts?
So hopefully I'll be able to bring some really exciting people from Stockholm to the podcast. There's a bunch of really exciting people that I'd love to have a more structured discussion with and record it. And hopefully it'll be of interest to people elsewhere as well. During my time at Klarna, we actually organized an event called eSuite in Berlin. We did, I think, 3 years in a row. And the idea was that we would really bring people together to have a dialogue around thought exchange. And one of the ambitions with that was that we were bringing people from different geographies, especially people from Stockholm to Germany and vice versa. So I've been somehow been trying to do that the past couple of years, but not too much focus, because I think that people in the different countries, or the industry in different countries, is good at different things. And if that can be a bit more mixed, I think that would be interesting to everybody. That's my read, at least. So that would be something I'm hoping to do.
Yeah, and I think
in a few episodes, at least.
And I think what you explained today in the podcast is how advanced the Swedish market is, and I think if we can learn from that will be super interesting and super exciting as well. I actually learned two new players today, Swish and Tink. So I'll dive into them after this show. Really understand what they do, and if there's a similar player active in the Dutch or the German market. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much, Lena, for being in the show. Maybe one closing remark. We usually record a podcast that lasts the time of an internal flight in Germany. So save 35, 40 minutes for you to grasp your podcast during the flight, but also maybe not to have a series of too long. So I think that's one thing we try to do, and this has been super exciting. Great to have you on board, Lena, and looking forward to many new shows to come.
My pleasure. Looking forward as well.
Great. Thanks so much.